Okay, hello, greetings everyone. What I'm going to try to do here is make a short video about making a panel from clay, or a slab as it's also known. Things you're going to need: some clay, firstly, a spray bottle, a knife of some kind. This might look different from your knife, but a knife will do. This might be more similar to what you're using, but any knife will do. I have a ruler here. This is just for scale, really. We don't necessarily need that, but and most importantly, some kind of flat, rigid tool. In this case, I'm going to be using a flat plastic scraper. Okay, so I'm going to, well, here are all those tools. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to put those all off to the side just for a bit here. First thing we need is just our clay. I'm going to be making a panel, not a very large panel. Probably it'll end up being about 12 by 12 or so, something like that. Put that aside. So, most important thing with trying to make a good, flat, evenly dispersed panel is to have a good homogeneous piece of clay. You can see this piece of clay here has a couple little bits of hard clay that are kind of mixed in there. Those aren't so good. Get those out. And otherwise, this is good soft material. Easily moves in the hands, but it's not so soft that it's sticky. My hands were releasing from it easily, so that's good. So the first thing we want to do is wedge up the clay, make sure that it's, homogeneous. There are no harder or softer areas, that the whole mass of clay is roughly the same. I'm just going to wedge that up a little bit. Wedging is important. You want to have no air bubbles in this mass of clay either. So I'll wedge it for, maybe up to a couple minutes or so. But the good thing is this is nice soft clay, so it wedges up really easy. Okay, so when you're finishing up wedging, you want to roll that up so that you don't trap any air at that moment. So I'll put a couple more pushes on this, and then what I'll do is just roll that up there. Now, to remember a couple things about wedging, what you saw me doing right there was called spiral wedging. This is another style of wedging, which has a number of names. I'm just going to call it straightforward wedging because you push the clay just straight in a straight line, perpendicular to your body and the table. Some people call this the ram's head method because that shape there, if you were to put some eyes there, it might look like a goat's head. I don't think so. Anyway, what's important though is as you're finishing up wedging, you want to roll that up, not fold it, but roll it up so that it does not trap any additional air. That's the important thing with that. So you end with a nice tidy mass. There are some small creases, but there's no air trapped there, so that should work just fine. Now there are differing theories on which orientation this should be in to disperse into a slab. This is the spiral orientation of the wedging here facing upward, or this would be the spirals facing perpendicular to the table. I don't know. I've tried it both ways. I think what I found that works best for me is more about the shape, and I like to start this way. So what we're going to do, in essence, you can see here I'm already beginning to make two parallel flat surfaces on the mass here. I'm essentially going to squash this in this orientation, of course, squash this downward and disperse it out. First starting as a circular form, and then we'll change that into more of a square shape, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So in order to do that, what I begin to do initially is just to rotate and drop that piece of clay and let the gravity do a lot of the work. So you can see there the shape has already changed on this side of the mass. It's sort of broadened out. It's very flat there, if you can see that. And then I'll flip that over and I'll repeat that process here on this side. And I think it's good to be in the habit of doing things equally on both sides. Obviously, you're going to end up with a more equal result. So right there, that's what that's starting to look like. You can see the crowding of the clay here between these two flat surfaces. So I'll just continue to do that until it gets to a point where I feel like it's not making much more progress in this state. And again, I'm just dropping that. I'm not throwing it or heaving it. It's just dropping. So here I'm starting to get the clay crowding here. It's starting to actually wrinkle and crease on the insides there. And this is right about the point where I change the format from a circular piece of clay, circular mass, into more of a square shape. So what I'll do is I'll just start to impact and sort of select and choose 4 distinct sides to this mass of clay. And so you can see that there. It's starting to turn into kind of a soft square. Now the reason I do that is because at this point in the forming of this, remember we're wanting to make a flat slab, we're going to start using a kind of, what would I say here, a kind of diagonal approach to the table or the surface that you're impacting the clay upon, so that it will begin to stretch out a little more. And essentially, before I was dropping this straight down, at this point that's not going to do very much, but if I drop the clay kind of in a diagonal motion, moving across the table just a bit, that impact will actually stretch that out. So let's just begin to do that. And I'm just going to go initially just 2 impacts in those 2 directions on both sides. You can go, whichever way you want, whatever feels comfortable for you. So this is what we're looking at now. You can see it's changing. And at this point, I'm going to speed up the process just a little bit. What we'll be doing is be using that diagonal approach to the table in addition to blunting the edges of the mass here. So you can see right now I'm just going to hit each of those sides. We'll call these the sides. We'll call this the face from now on. So I'm going to blunt those sides. And I like to actually draw the clay back toward me. I just find that my hand gesture that way is a little easier. So I'm going to draw that towards me and then blunt the side. Draw that towards me and then blunt the side. And this is where we really start to see a lot of change now, a lot of stretching of the panel, which is good. That's what we want. We want a nice piece of clay that's flat and broad. So at this point I'm kind of watching this thing, right? Where I need to, I will blunt the side just a little bit, and I want to pay attention to the face to see, is it getting thicker, right? Like taller, that is, taller on one side or the other? Is it uneven? The most common problem is to have a big hump of clay in the middle and the edges get very thin. And this blunting of the side or the edge is what keeps that from happening. So at this point now you can see this is, right, this is floppy, and it's not terribly thick any longer. It's only about, I'd say, 1/4 inch thick or so. Or if you're more into the metric system, that would be about 1 centimeter. Maybe just a little more than 1 centimeter thick. And I think, you know, at this point it's good to know, you should know this ahead of time, but it's good to know, well, what am I doing with this slab? What is it going to be used for? And how thick should it really be? So this is relatively even, flat across right now. You see me just blending the edges just a little bit here. I think that's just a habit that I have, to kind of touch those and blunt them just a little bit, because I want to get the most possible material out of this piece of clay that I can. We've just invested in it. So I like to use as much as I possibly can. So, oops. So here's my rule here, and boy, good prediction. I said it would be about 12 inches, I think, in the beginning, and it's just about 12 by 12. Pretty good. Who cares, right? Because I'm not sure what I'm doing with this slab just yet. But good predictions nonetheless. Okay, so we've dispersed the clay, and if you remember our conversation about clay particles and how they stack and move, disperse that is, what we've done is we've taken all those nicely aligned clay particles that stack up, and we've spread them out. So they're maybe misaligned right now. And you can see that if you look very close on the surface, you'll see little kind of stretched areas. You might even see a very slight cracking on the surface. Let's look at this side. Oh, it looks fine. This clay is very soft, so we're not seeing a lot of pulling like that. If your clay is a little stiffer, you might see more of that. Okay, so the last step to making this panel that I think is perhaps the most important part is to compress the slab. So that's where these items come in. What I'm going to do here is just give the surface of the clay just a little spritz of water, not a lot of standing water, just a little spritz. I'm going to make sure at least the edge of my tool is clean. I should be presenting tools that are just bright and clean, but that's not who I am really. Anyway, I'm going to use the blunt edge of the tool. I'm going to be sort of bringing a downward pressure against the slab and moving that water around. That acts as kind of a slippery material that allows the tool to slide across the clay. And I'm going to just give a slight downward pressure, and that will help to compress the clay, make it a little more dense. It makes a kind of tighter surface to the panel itself, which will help for it to maintain its shape through the drying and the firing, which of course is coming up, right? Of course. So you can see here I'm careful to try to get the entire surface, and I'm careful to go in all directions. Initially, you might feel some lumps and some thicker and thinner areas, but this tool will also help to make that all regular, make that all flat. I sometimes use the analogy of a Zamboni, which is the big machine that runs over the ice skating rink and simultaneously adds some water to the surface and uses some brushes and blades to kind of cut the surface all level so that people can ice skate on a nice, beautiful, smooth, flat surface. Now, depends what you're doing, right? Like some slabs don't need to be perfect, but if the exactitude of the thing matters in the artwork that you're making, then you want that to be pretty crisp. Okay, so there's a little bit of noise on the surface. That's just this is an old scraper which I've used to clean the floor and all kinds of other things. There's some little marks in it that just leave those lines. I'm not bothered by those right now, considering what I'm doing. So we've done one side. What we want to do next there is I'm just bringing a wear board. This is just a piece of drywall. In your case, it might be wooden, might be drywall too, whatever it is. But this is a wear board that I'm going to move the slab onto before I compress the other side. And that way I can move it. I can put it somewhere else, that is, while it dries. Let's see if I can get that in the frame there, because sometimes moving this is a important part too. So I'm going to grab underneath that. I'm going to use a broad pressure with my hands to try to get a hold of that thing. I'm going to peel it up off the table. Let's see, hang on. I'm going to try and kick that into the frame there. So this slab is bending to a certain degree as I lift it up. I want to try to mimic that same bend as I set it down in the other direction as I set it down. Clay has a memory, and if you take a panel of clay and you curve it this way, even though you might lay it flat and let it dry and make a thing from it and everything like that, during the firing it often will sort of remember and go back to that curved shape. So when I pick that up and it curves a bit, if I can curve that back, let's see if I can do that with my hands. If I can curve that back in the opposite direction, you know, I can do that, I can hyperextend. If I can curve that back in the opposite direction, then it should be more likely to end up flat. And again, of course, it's flat against the board, but it has a bit of a memory. So same thing here, just give it a little spritz of water, and then I'll go back and I'll compress this. So this compression helps to, you know, align the clay particles and have them oriented flat against the board. That'll really help too to keep this slab from warping and bending during drying or during the firing. So all four directions, you know, as much as you can. I try to be somewhat systematic about this so that I don't miss anything, and I find that the more systematic you are, the more flat the slab ends up being as well. Okay. So the last thing I do, and again it depends what you're working on, what you're making, but the last thing I do is just get rid of the edges. The clay particles at the edge here, they don't compress very well. It's more likely that you have a little bit of edge cracking sometimes. If I lift this up and show you the edge of the slab here, I don't have any of that currently, but you might find that you have a little cracking there at the edge. So I have just a general rule that I just use my knife. I'm not gonna you know, measure it or anything, but and I just cut away you know, a couple centimeters at least of clay. You're not gonna want to use that. You're not going to want to employ that in an artwork because it's likely to crack later during the drying. Okay, so that's scrap clay right away. Give it a, we'll just put that there. Give it a few spritz of water throughout. Kind of ball that up and set that there. You might even want to cover that in plastic right off the bat, or put it right back into the bag of clay just as it is right there, so that it's not drying and getting wasted. Could be incorporated into something else later. Perhaps the very last thing I'll do is put a little tiny bit of water on my fingers, and I'll just run my finger over that very edge, that cut edge. Adds a little moisture to the edge, compresses that edge just a little bit too. As you know, as things dry, the edges will dry first, and so I give that little bit of moisture, a little compression, just to, you know, kind of, what's the word, give it a little help to dry more evenly and to stick around for the long haul. So there's our panel. You can see it's pretty parallel. It's about, I'd say, a little less than a centimeter thick. It's pretty standardized and it looks pretty good. All right. Thanks for watching.